The night sky has always been a ledger of questions, a vast black page where our ancestors etched fear into constellations, and our scientists pencil in equations that challenge the dark. If you stand out under that sky long enough, your heartbeat starts to sync with the silence. You feel the scale of it, the unblinking patience with which the cosmos waits for us to become ready. Most nights, the stars simply burn, but some nights, something crosses the page that does not behave like background ink. It moves with intention, or seems to, and the human mind, wired for patterns, primed to survive by guessing at intent, wakes up. That is the kind of night we are living through now. A visitor has arrived from interstellar space. Astronomers call it Three-Eye Atlas. To accountants of orbits, it is a line item: discovery time, brightness, trajectory, spectral features. To everyone else who looks twice at the numbers, it is an unsettling question written in clean, deliberate strokes. It did not announce itself with fireworks. A faint smear appeared in a survey frame from Hawaii, another on the next pass, enough to flag the algorithms and tug the human eye. The early calculations said the quiet part out loud: not bound to the sun, not born in our distant comet reservoirs, not a returning pilgrim from some elliptical exile. It had the speed of elsewhere and the angle of someone who studied the traffic before stepping into the road. Most interstellar visitors slice through our planetary plane at skewed angles, like birds cutting across the wind. Atlas hugged the plane retrograde, almost flat to the ecliptic, as if choosing a lane and staying there. 5 degrees off in a sky where randomness should tilt you all over the sphere is not a smoking gun. It is a raised eyebrow that never quite lowers. The raised eyebrow became a frown as the instruments climbed the ladder of sensitivity. Hubble's unblinking eye teased a fuzzy coma from the darkness. Dust. Gas. The familiar signature of sunlight carving vapor from ice. Comforting at first glance, a comet just a comet, a frozen time capsule obeying physics older than we are. But comfort withers under scrutiny. The brightness distribution did not balance the way a textbook coma does. Sunward, something looked too insistent, as if a headlight glowed through the haze. There are natural ways to get that: jets focused by topography, rotation that concentrates venting along a face. But the image lingered in the mind, like a story you are sure you have heard before and cannot place.
Welcome. You are watching Whisper Science. Make sure to subscribe and join us for more amazing science content. Now, let's move back to the video.
We carry those images forward, whether we like it or not. Then the chemistry arrived with a knock you could feel in the floorboards. James Webb listened in the infrared and wrote down a ratio you rarely see: carbon dioxide to water, 8:1. In comets, water is supposed to be the melody. Here it was, rhythm at best, drummer off to the side, while carbon dioxide took center stage under a harsh white spotlight. Spherex stretched the stage even wider, tracing a CO2 envelope so extravagant it could swallow the space between Earth and the Moon. Meanwhile, nickel lines sang with clarity, and iron kept its distance, a duet without its partner, which is not how nature usually arranges the chorus. Each datum has a natural alibi if you work for it. Together they feel like fingerprints that do not smudge when you rub them with skepticism. So, what do you do with fingerprints when the suspect refuses to stand still? You plan to watch, to measure, to keep the cameras rolling. Except the cosmos has its own security lighting, and sometimes it shines directly into your lens. Perihelion for Atlas arrives hand in hand with solar conjunction, that hateful geometry where the object slips so close to the sun as glare that your instruments must look away or risk damage. Weeks of blindness exactly when heating, venting, fragmentation, or anything else interesting would most likely happen. It is not proof of design, it is simply a perfect place to hide. It is the curve in the road where the car you are following vanishes behind the grove of trees, and you realize you will not know whether it braked, turned, or sped up until it reappears, or does not. There is a discipline to facing that uncertainty. Institutions practice it every day. NASA and ESA repeat the liturgy of caution. Call it a comet until evidence compels you otherwise. Extraordinary claims start in the red and must climb back towards zero on the strength of data alone. That discipline is the spine of science, but the heart is curiosity, and its pulse quickens when the numbers rhyme with intent. Low inclination, timed blackout, chemistry that behaves more like a chosen coolant than a random mix of frozen volatiles. If you were sketching a reconnaissance route through a system you wished to study discreetly, you could do worse than the path 3I Atlas is tracing. Mars for a different angle, the Sun for power and cover, Jupiter for magnetosphere and spectacle. The itinerary reads like a field manual a cautious intelligence might carry. We have seen versions of this play before, but only in the mirror. Our explorers go quiet behind the moon. Our Mars craft sleep through conjunctions, storing data until the static clears. Our classified satellites' time burns when ground telescopes are blinded by daylight or weather or geometry. None of this proves anything about the visitor. It only reminds us that strategy is not an alien invention. It is a property of minds that must manage risk under constraint. And constraint is everywhere here: fuel, heat, detection, distance, time. Even if everything about Atlas is natural, its passage is a seminar in how those constraints interact to create stories that feel like plans. Step back from the whiteboards for a moment and consider the human angle. We have known about interstellar objects for less than a decade in any operational sense. For all of recorded history, none were confirmed. Then the dam broke. ʻOumuamua arrived thin and evasive, left us with light curve riddles and a small acceleration that refuses to sit quietly in the corner. Borisov followed like a palate cleanser, a comfortingly messy comet with textbook chemistry that reassured everyone who needed reassuring. Now Atlas enters not as a repetition of either, but as a third note in a chord we do not yet know how to name. 3 data points, no trend, but enough to force the question: is weirdness the rule up there? And are expectations the error? Or are we genuinely catching the outliers because outliers are the ones that get our attention? Selection bias is not a villain. It is a lens. The trick is remembering you are looking through it. The practicalities will always bite, even in a mystery. Ground telescopes have sun avoidance limits because glass and detectors have melting points, and budgets have auditors. Space telescopes orbit in obedience to thermal regimes and momentum wheels that cannot be bullied without consequence. For a few long weeks, the safest, smartest thing to do is also the worst thing for curiosity. Look away and wait. Waiting is an art form we have not mastered. The news cycle hisses for answers. The internet rewards performative certainty. Silence feels like surrender. But in astronomy, silence is sometimes method. You let the object pass the arc you cannot watch. Then you pounce with everything you have and compare the world you predicted to the world you got. The difference between those worlds is where reality lives. And what a checklist awaits the moment our gaze can safely slide back toward the sun's far edge. Does the position land on the ephemeris plots? Or do tiny residuals tell you something burned, pushed, corrected? Does the CO2 dominance soften as deeper, wetter layers begin to sublimate? Or does the ratio hold like a thermostat, indifferent to distance, faithful to an internal logic? Do iron lines finally join the spectrum, or does nickel keep singing solo as if the chorus were edited? Does the forward glow reshape into symmetrical dust, or does it remain stubbornly directional, as though the windshield were warmer than the trunk by design? None of these single answers will shout the truth, but together they will hum it, and the hum will be louder than our wishful thinking. It is tempting to leap to the story with the cleanest lines. Technology makes a better campfire tale than chemistry. It is less humble, more cinematic. But there is a reason the scientific method begins with restraint. The cosmos is famous for generating coincidences at a scale that outruns intuition. 1 in 1,000 happens every day when you have 1,000,000 dice rolling in every direction. The great discipline is to let the dice finish rolling before you narrate destiny onto their faces. If Atlas emerges unchanged and boring, the victory will belong to patience, not to those who shouted loudest during the blackout. If it emerges changed in ways that resist the natural playbook, patience wins again, because only patience writes down the differences precisely enough to matter. Still, we are allowed our metaphors while we wait. Imagine a research ship entering a fog-shrouded archipelago at night. The captain kills the lights as it rounds a cape so that fishing villages will not track its outline. The crew registers currents by sound, reads the wind by the tension in rigging line, listens to the creak in the hull. When the ship clears the headland, the lights stay off a little longer while eyes adjust, and by the time anyone on shore notices the silhouette, the course has already shifted by a few degrees, enough that the wake points to one cove while the ship slips into another. Is that what is happening here? Maybe not. Probably not. But the geometry rhymes, and rhyme is how the human mind remembers to look closely when the fog lifts. There is another, quieter reason this story grips so tightly. It makes us rehearse who we want to be when surprise knocks. We are a species that oscillates between dismissal and panic. The middle stance, calm, interrogative, grounded, is a feat we only achieve on purpose. A strange object with stranger chemistry passing through a perfect observational blind spot is the laboratory in which to practice that feat. Ask clean questions, pre-register predictions, share data, admit error quickly, hold your metaphors loosely, map your own biases onto the page, and circle them in ink so you do not accidentally follow their arrows as if they were roads. If you walked outside right now and let your eyes climb into the cold until city noise thinned to a hiss, you might feel the scale of the days ahead. Somewhere out there, an object from an unknown nursery is approaching a star it has never met, while we prime instruments that were dreams only a generation ago. We will miss some of its closest secrets because physics says we must protect our tools from the sun. That stings, but it is not tragedy. It is choreography. The dance will resume when geometry relaxes its grip, and when it does, the steps will tell us whether we imagined intention in noise or finally heard a new instrument playing under the familiar symphony of dust and light. So we end this first vigil not with an answer, but with a promise to our own better habits. The promise to look again, to measure twice, to resist the gravity of the headline and the narcotic of certainty. The visitor will cross behind the bright curtain soon, and the theater of speculation will swell to fill the gap. Let it. When the curtain lifts, reality will take the stage without caring what we guessed. And if there is a twist, if the path bends by a hair, if the spectrum stays stubborn, if the glow refuses to balance, then the play entering its second act will be stranger, richer, worth every quiet hour we spent under the unblinking stars listening for footsteps in the dark. Silence has a texture, and for astronomers it is never merely the absence of sound. It is the pause on a monitor where numbers should be flowing, the blank strip on a chart where a line was meant to continue, the forced stillness when the geometry of the solar system takes the pencil out of your hand and sets it gently on the desk. The object we are following now descends towards such a silence. As it closes in on the sun, it enters the forbidden zone, where even our bravest instruments must avert their eyes. This is the quiet of solar conjunction, not the quiet of distance, but the quiet of glare, the hush imposed by brilliance. For weeks the visitor will be busy, heated, shedding and reshaping, but to us it will be a rumor on the far side of light. The mind reaches for metaphors in moments like this, because metaphors offer something to hold. You could call conjunction a curtain that falls at the peak of a play. You could call it a bend in the road where the taillights vanish. You could call it the bright fog that swallows a lighthouse just as a ship approaches. All are true in their way, and none change the fact that the most active chapter of this passage may be written where we cannot read it line by line. It feels like a trick even if it is only the honest arithmetic of orbits, a coincidence that invites suspicion simply by arriving at the most inconvenient time. In the days just before the blackout, the mood among observers grows taut and careful. Schedules tighten, scripts are drafted. Teams rehearse the moment when the sky becomes safe again to point at, when insulation and mirrors and electronics will no longer be in danger. Telescopes that can see in the infrared prepare to listen for the soft signatures of gases. Photometric instruments are primed to measure brightness with the steadiness of a metronome. The people behind them practice the discipline of prediction, writing down where the object should appear and how bright it should be and what kind of spectrum should spill out if nothing unusual has occurred. Predictions are not just guesses, they are traps set for reality, humane traps that will release truth if truth steps into them. But while precision gathers on one side of the horizon, imagination gathers on the other. Everyone who has spent a life around spacecraft knows the power of a blackout. Apollo crews slipped behind the moon and vanished from radio. There were minutes when no voice could cross the stone. Minutes when all you could do in mission control was watch the clock and believe your mathematics. When the capsule emerged on schedule, you understood what it meant to trust the invisible. Our robots to Mars still bow to conjunctions. For days they stop driving, they stop drilling. They hum quietly and wait, because the star that warms them is a sea of charged particles that tears at every whisper of signal. Even the machines that watch the sun sometimes go blind near its edge. We build our cosmos out of patience as much as out of glass and silicon. It is tempting to call timing like this deliberate, because intent is easier on the nerves than chaos. If you wanted to make adjustments unobserved, you would choose exactly this window, the interval when every eye on Earth must close. Yet geometry alone can produce the same theater. What matters is not whether the curtain fell on purpose, but what is different when it rises. If the path is the same, if the brightness evolves as simple heating predicts, if the chemistry bends toward the ordinary as deeper layers wake and water finally takes the stage, then coincidence was only coincidence, and the mind can stand down. If the path shifts by a hair beyond what vapor can push, if the light refuses to behave, if the chemistry holds to its stubborn imbalance as if governed by an internal logic, then the mind must stand back up and ask harder questions. People imagine waiting as a passive act. In observatories, waiting is work. Ephemerides are refined down to the arcsecond. Dust models are tuned to include the way particles polarize light at different angles. Exposure times are calculated so that the first frames after reappearance will not saturate or worse, miss a transient brightening that vanishes in minutes. Amateur astronomers tune their rigs as well, stacking software and calibration frames, coordinating across longitudes so that the night on one continent hands the object to the next without a gap. You can hear the discipline in the way they speak about air and optics and seeing, the old craft words that turn patience into an instrument. The chemistry is its own cliff edge. Before the glare takes it, the coma glows with a preference that offends our habit. Carbon dioxide outweighs water by a wide margin. Nickel sings without its iron companion. A forward-leaning glow seems to insist on the sunward face instead of settling into symmetrical haze. Each of these can be made to kneel before a natural explanation if you coax the models hard enough. Radiation can process a crust. Dust grains can trap water. Jets can be directional. But taken together, they ask to be watched with the sort of attention that does not look away from contradictions. When the visitor reappears, if iron has finally joined the spectrum and water has risen, we will nod, not because we crave disappointment, but because the universe is allowed to be complicated without being cunning. If the imbalance persists, the nod will be slower, and the air in the control rooms will feel heavier. Blackouts invite performances from the world beyond the lab. That is their way. Commentaries will thicken. Headlines will spin certainty from shadows. Some will insist that the silence hides intent. Others will insist that the silence is proof of boredom. Both performances are answers to anxiety. They settle the stomach for a moment. Inside the rooms where the measurements are made, there is less appetite for settling. There is only the rhythm of preparation, the quiet superstition of checking cables twice, the ritual of sharpening timelines so that if the unexpected happens, you are ready to notice it and ready to record it. Still, even in enforced night, there are edges you can look at. Coronagraphs that block the sun may catch a hint near the limb if the geometry is kind. Instruments that watch the solar wind for its own reasons might register a signature in dust or plasma if the object wanders close enough to lines of sight that were never drawn for it. The odds are thin. The people who work those instruments know it. Yet thin odds have paid off in astronomy more times than anyone can count, and no one will forgive themselves if they do not look just because they expected nothing to be there. We must also entertain the sort of ending no one wishes for, but everyone must acknowledge. Objects like this are fragile when heated from within and without. They split, they spall, they peel like old paint lifted by sun and wind. If the visitor breaks apart behind the glare, we will not witness the crack itself, but the sky will still carry the echo. A point becomes a smear becomes a cloud. The path it was meant to follow becomes a track of dust. The disappointment would be real because mystery too is fragile. But even a ruin is a lesson. The distribution of fragments, the rate at which they dim, the size of grains inferred from the way they scatter light, all of that writes a new chapter in our notebooks about how ice and rock from another sky tolerate the embrace of a new star. There is another sort of silence that conjunction teaches. The silence of our own thoughts, when we realize how much of our certainty is only impatience dressed in a clever coat. We want stories to arrive on schedule. We want the universe to present us with unambiguous lines. We want to say natural or intentional and then turn the page. But astronomy is not a courtroom. It is a long negotiation with light, in which even the most convincing witness sometimes contradicts themselves between depositions. You learn to live with that contradiction. You learn to file away the discomfort and let the data do their slow work. None of this means shutting down wonder. Wonder is the current that keeps the heavy boat of discipline moving. There is room to imagine that a visitor could be more than ice and dust. There is room to imagine strategies in the way it uses the architecture of our system. There is room to imagine that the forward glow is more than an accident of sunlight and surface. Imagination sets out the questions that precision tries to answer. The only vow you make is to let the answers stand even if they disappoint your stories. Think of the choreography to come when the curtain lifts. First frames will search the predicted patch of sky. If the object is there, a little to the left or right, a little brighter or fainter, the quiet intake of breath will be the same. If it is not, the room will expand as people pull up alternate maps and trace out how far a natural push could have moved it, and how far a different sort of push would have. Spectra will follow as soon as they can be taken. Lines will be fit. Continuum will be subtracted. Ratios will be calculated. Across the globe, separate teams will do the same arithmetic and the same algebra with different cameras and different techniques, because in science, what you most wish to avoid is the illusion of agreement, born of doing things the same way. Meanwhile, at different vantage points, other machines may be listening. Around Mars, instruments meant for the red planet could tilt a little and measure a little if the geometry is kind. The results will be noisy, but even noisy data can close a door or open one. Months later, the possibility of a close pass near Jupiter will tempt another sort of attention, a chance to watch how a stranger swims through a sea of magnetism thicker and more alive than any other in the planetary realm. But that is far ahead. First, we face the interval where the star at the center of everything is also the most beautiful obstacle in the sky. There is a private ritual many observers share. On the last night before the sun steals the view, they step outside and look up with their own eyes, not through the architecture of lenses and software, but through the old architecture of bone and liquid and nerve. They take in the scale as their lungs slow. They remember that everything they know about this visitor is only borrowed light. They promise themselves to follow the light wherever it wanders when it returns, even if it wanders away from the stories they have rehearsed. Then they go back in and finish their checklists and sleep as best they can, the way sailors sleep before a storm, the way climbers sleep before a ridge. The night the sky becomes safe again will not look different to most people. Dawn will still wash a city, noon will still cook concrete, evening will still dangle its ordinary stars. In the rooms where the watchers sit, it will feel like the first breath after being underwater too long. They will move as quietly as surgeons, and then the first frames will land, and then the second, and the hush will deepen or break depending on what those frames contain. If the numbers line up with the map, there will be relief that does not feel like defeat. If the numbers refuse to line up, the familiar engine of skepticism will start at once, not to kill the thrill, but to make sure the thrill is not a trick. So we live with this silence because it is the price of living with a bright star. We accept that some chapters in the cosmos are written off stage and revealed only by the way the actors walk back on. We promise ourselves not to mistake our guesses for the world, and we prepare to celebrate either the ordinary that teaches us how strange the ordinary can be, or the strange that reminds us how much of the story has yet to be told. When the curtain rises, the first clues will not shout. They will whisper in numbers and curves and ratios. Our task is to listen well enough to hear them. And that is how part 2 leaves us. Not with an answer, but with a room arranged for one. The instruments are cooling, the exposures are cued, the minds are steadied, and the bright hush is almost here. On the far side of that hush, the visitor will speak again in the only language it has ever used with us, the language of light. What it says next decides which path we follow, and the next step of that path is where we go now. Waiting is an art, but it is also a wait. While the visitor hides behind the sun, silence becomes its own presence, pressing against the watchers who count days and recalibrate models. Astronomers live in this tension often, but rarely with stakes that feel so strange. For a familiar comet, silence is only routine. For an interstellar object, It is a void into which the imagination pours everything it can carry. And so, as Atlas vanishes, speculation grows, not only among the public but even in the minds of those who practice restraint as a profession. It is impossible not to wonder. Silence is fertile ground for questions, and the questions here are legion. Some ask, why now? Why in the span of less than a decade have 3 interstellar visitors been spotted when none were recorded before? The easy answer is instruments. Surveys are deeper, faster, wider. Telescopes sweep more of the sky each night than an entire century of astronomers managed by hand. But statistics are merciless. If the rate of arrivals truly is this high, then we should expect a steady trickle forever forward. And if that trickle does not come, if instead the next decade goes barren, then the coincidence of 3 in such short order will nag at our confidence. Was it chance? Was it a cluster? Or was it something else altogether, some deeper rhythm of galactic tides we have yet to understand? Others ask, what do interstellar visitors mean for the story of our system? Each is a messenger from another nursery, a shard from a different star's construction yard. They carry in their ice and dust the fingerprints of alien chemistry, the ratios of gases that formed under suns older or younger or stranger than ours. They are samples delivered to our doorstep without launch windows or budgets. To study one is to peek into the recipe book of worlds that might never orbit near enough to visit. And yet the samples are not inert. They move, they shine, they vanish, they tease. They force us to acknowledge that the cosmos does not arrive neatly bottled in laboratories, but comes instead as riddles wrapped in trajectories. The imagination also drifts to the possibility of intent. ʻOumuamua left that door ajar when it accelerated without a tail, when its cigar or pancake shape spun like a shard, yet refused to glow like a comet. Borisov closed it a little by behaving as comets should, dirty snowball on schedule, chemistry obedient. Atlas opens it again with its low inclination, its blackout at perihelion, its odd chemistry. To wonder about intent is not to surrender to fantasy. It is to honor the pattern recognition that kept our ancestors alive. A noise in the grass might be wind or might be predator. You consider both until you know. Astronomy, for all its numbers, is not immune to that instinct, but instinct must be bridled. The history of astronomy is littered with false alarms, canals on Mars, moons of Venus, signals that turned out to be pigeons roosting in a radio dish. Each error is a reminder that wonder without patience leads astray, and yet, without wonder, patience is sterile. What Atlas demands is the marriage of both, to wait without losing the heat of curiosity, to imagine without proclaiming, to prepare without assuming. That is the discipline of the coming weeks, the hard art of living with absence. Meanwhile, models churn. Computers simulate what the coma should look like under different assumptions of ice and rock. They simulate how jets might bend a path and how much deviation is acceptable before natural forces break. They simulate brightness curves that will be compared the moment the object emerges again. Each line of code is a hypothesis waiting to be confirmed or slain. Scientists know most hypotheses die. They also know that the survivors shape the skeleton of understanding. Every line written now is a bet placed against the dice of reality. It is easy to forget that all of this rests on a fragile chain of human effort. The telescopes waiting to resume are not just glass and metal. They are institutions, budgets, careers, sleepless nights. Behind every scheduled observation is a person who argued for it, who persuaded committees, who promised that the data would matter. Behind every model is a student typing late into the night, debugging, comparing, learning the stubborn habits of photons and dust. The story of Atlas is not just a story of a rock or an ice ball or a probe. It is a story of how hundreds of humans coordinate to listen to something that has no voice. The silence of conjunction stretches beyond the professional. Enthusiasts track the days, reading updates, scanning forums. They know they will not be the first to see the reappearance, but they hope to be among the first to hear. Amateur telescopes are tuned, mounts aligned, cameras cooled, software rehearsed. The amateur community has a long history of spotting comets, of catching novae, of being the eyes that professionals cannot always spare. They will be waiting too, and their voices will fill the nights with chatter and image stacks and questions that sometimes outpace the patience of institutions. Together, the professional and the amateur weave a net of vigilance that spans the planet. Yet no net can span the blackout. The sun rules that domain. And so part 3 is about waiting. Not passive but active waiting, full of preparation, full of sharpened pencils and cooled detectors. It is about acknowledging that we will lose sight of the visitor at the very moment it is most alive. It is about learning to be comfortable with that, to accept that science sometimes advances by absence as much as by presence. For when the object reappears, the differences between prediction and reality will sing louder, precisely because we endured the silence in between. The next act of the story will depend on what that reappearance reveals. But before we get there, before the curtain lifts, we must sit with the blackout. The blackout is not empty. It is filled with human imagination, with fear and hope, with models and metaphors, with the restless rhythm of minds that cannot abide a mystery, but must. And in that restless rhythm lies the real heart of the tale. Because what Atlas teaches us, more than anything, is not just about chemistry or orbit or inclination. It is about ourselves, about how we meet the unknown when it refuses to meet us halfway. That is where the silence leaves us. That is the lesson of the sun's glare, and beyond it waits the reappearance, when the visitor will either affirm the comfort of the ordinary or whisper again that something stranger is passing through. When the curtain finally lifts, the first frames will not be dramatic to the casual eye. They will show points of light on black, data numbers tucked into headers, graphs that wobble into shape. Yet to those who have waited through the blackout, those points will be louder than any explosion. They will confirm or deny, they will match or stray. And from that simple comparison, the predicted path against the real one, an entire cascade of conclusions will fall. Astronomy thrives on tiny differences. A single arcsecond deviation can hint at a force we did not expect. A brightness change of a fraction of a magnitude can tell of outbursts or fragmentation. To most it will look like dots. To the few who trained their eyes, it will look like revelation. If Atlas returns where expected, the sigh of relief will be both professional and personal. Predictions will be tested, models refined, the ledger of anomalies rebalanced. The story will not end, but it will soften into something that fits more easily into our categories. Carbon dioxide can be explained by crusts processed by radiation. Nickel without iron can be rationalized by selective sublimation. A flat inclination can be placed within the bounds of improbable, but not impossible. Scientists are good at stitching the unusual into larger quilts of possibility. But if Atlas reappears shifted, altered, stubborn in its strangeness, then the stitches begin to unravel. One anomaly can be tolerated. A cluster becomes a new fabric altogether. The first spectra will matter most. Lines of gas and dust are the fingerprints of the visitor. If water rises in strength, balancing the carbon dioxide, the chemistry slides closer to the familiar. If it remains tilted, if the imbalance holds, then the questions grow teeth. Iron's absence will be checked again and again. Could calibration errors explain it? Could instrumental quirks? Teams will swap data, compare methods, verify. If the absence survives that scrutiny, then the simplest explanations will fade, and more complex ones will step in. And complexity in science is always a herald of something we have not yet grasped. Brightness curves will tell their own tale. Comets pulse as they rotate, their surfaces venting unevenly. A pattern in that pulse can reveal spin rates, shapes, even hints of internal structure. If Atlas pulses with mechanical precision, with a regularity too clean to be natural, suspicion will stir. If its brightness swings wildly, chaotic and uneven, it will look more like an object tearing itself apart than like a machine. Both outcomes are dramatic in their own way. One points outward to intelligence, the other inward to the fragility of alien ices. Either way, the story deepens. And then there is the path itself. Gravity is exacting. With dozens of telescopes watching, the course of an interstellar object can be traced with a precision that borders on obsessive. Any deviation beyond the whisper of sublimation must be accounted for. When ʻOumuamua accelerated, the community bent over backward to find explanations. Hydrogen outgassing invisible to telescopes, exotic ices sublimating faster than expected, pressures from sunlight on an unusually thin body. None satisfied entirely, but all were preferable to declaring intent. Atlas will face the same scrutiny. If its course shifts, explanations will be sought in natural physics first. Only if those fail will other whispers return. The public by then will be ravenous. Media will swarm with interpretations, many careless, some earnest. The gap of conjunction will have stoked imaginations too long. Some will declare the object proof of alien presence. Others will mock the idea, pointing to centuries of false alarms. The truth will lie somewhere between patience and imagination, but patience is rarely glamorous. Scientists will speak carefully, their caution often mistaken for evasion. Yet behind the press conferences and journal papers, in the quiet emails and conference calls, the tension will be palpable. No one wants to leap too soon. No one wants to dismiss too quickly. Everyone knows that history will remember whichever stance is proven right. Beyond the data, there is a philosophical weight pressing in. Each interstellar visitor forces us to confront our place in a galaxy we barely know. These objects are messengers, but they do not speak in words. They speak in ratios, in angles, in tail lengths, in spectral lines. We translate those into questions. Are we alone? Are we being watched? Or is this only the echo of alien geologies, the debris of other worlds no more alive than the rocks beneath our feet? Each answer reshapes the mirror in which humanity sees itself. To declare the universe silent is to declare ourselves solitary. To find otherwise would be to step into a community we cannot yet imagine. There is also the shadow of fear. If such an object were a probe, then it implies watchers with reach beyond our own. It implies patience measured not in years but in eons. It implies that our system is not remote but noticed. Some recoil at that idea, preferring randomness over attention. Others lean toward it, longing for confirmation that we are not alone. In both directions, the data of Atlas will be pulled like clay, shaped to fit desires. The task of science is to resist that pull, to let the clay harden into what it will be without forcing it into molds. That is harder than it sounds. Hope and fear are strong hands. The reappearance then will be more than an astronomical event. It will be a cultural one, a test of how we handle ambiguity. Do we shout conclusions before the data cools? Do we wait until the evidence is undeniable? Do we allow ourselves to imagine without mistaking imagination for proof? The answers will not only define Atlas, they will define us. The universe does not grade us on our restraint, but history does. Every time we leap too soon or laugh too quickly, we leave a trace in our own record of who we were when the stars knocked on our door. And so part 4 leaves us on the cusp of that moment. The silence has been endured. The eyes of the world are turned to the horizon where the visitor will re-emerge. The instruments are ready. The models are drawn. The predictions are pinned like fragile butterflies, waiting to be compared to the living thing. What comes next will either fold this object gently back into the ledger of comets or pry the ledger open to a new category we have barely begun to name. The first frames are about to arrive. The question is not just what they will show, but how we will receive them. And that is where the story turns next. The first frames after conjunction are always the hardest to interpret. They are faint, noisy, jittering at the edge of what our detectors can comfortably manage. Yet within those imperfect images, the future of the story begins to take shape. For days the world has been waiting, restless with silence. Now at last the curtain lifts. The visitor has returned to our gaze. And what those first data show will either soothe or ignite the imaginations that have been burning unchecked. Imagine the scene in a control room. Screens glow in the dimness. Numbers scroll down columns. Graphs draw themselves line by line. A technician murmurs confirmation of signal, of coordinates. A principal investigator leans forward, scanning for alignment with predicted ephemerides. Was the position exact? Was it shifted? Even a tiny displacement will cause hearts to quicken, because tiny displacements can speak louder than grand gestures. Gravity is unflinching. If the numbers don't match gravity's promise, then something else has intervened. In those first hours, data flows slowly. Teams check calibration, repeat exposures, compare with reference stars. There is no rush to announce, not yet, but word leaks quickly anyway. Whispers ripple across networks and forums. The visitor is back, brighter than expected or dimmer, or perhaps right on target. Each whisper is amplified by the hunger of those who endured the blackout. Scientists know better than to trust first impressions, but the rest of the world does not wait. Headlines sprout, speculation reawakens, the silence of the sun is replaced by a storm of interpretation. Then the spectra arrive. Here the truth sharpens. Thin lines on graphs, peaks and valleys like a heart monitor tell of elements boiling off the surface. If water has surged, if the balance tilts back toward the ordinary, a sigh of relief will pass through observatories. If carbon dioxide still rules with iron hand, the sigh will catch in the throat. If nickel still sings alone without iron, the room will quiet further. People will speak in lower voices, double-check their calibrations, look for excuses in the hardware. And if none are found, they will sit longer with the data, feeling its weight. This is the moment when patience must be strongest. It is easy to leap, easy to declare. But the great danger of science is not ignorance, it is haste. Every anomaly must be tested against the ordinary. Could dust obscure lines? Could detector noise mimic ratios? Could solar wind distort tails in ways we do not usually see? All these questions are asked before anyone dares to whisper that the strangeness may be real, for history is cruel to those who speak too soon. The canals of Mars, the phantom moons of Venus, the signals that turned out to be pigeons, all are carved into the caution of every astronomer alive today. Yet even caution cannot fully cage curiosity. Behind the restraint, imaginations work feverishly. If the orbit is shifted, how much fuel would be needed to achieve that correction? If the chemistry is stubbornly alien, what design might it imply? If the glow remains asymmetrical, could it be exhaust or reflection or shielding? These questions are not shouted into microphones, but they are whispered over coffee, scribbled on whiteboards, hidden in drafts never submitted. They live in the minds of those who, for all their discipline, are still human, still prone to wonder what it would mean if we are not the only makers of machines in the dark. The public, meanwhile, does not hesitate. Social networks bloom with theories, some wild, some strangely prescient. Amateur astronomers post images of their own, stacking exposures, chasing the visitor across their skies. They argue about brightness, about tails, about whether fragmentation has begun. They care less about patience and more about participation. And in their chatter, the story of Atlas becomes not only a scientific mystery, but a cultural one, a shared narrative in which everyone feels a stake. The visitor belongs to all of us after all, not just to the ones with access to the largest mirrors. As days pass, the picture clarifies. Brightness curves take shape, spin rates are estimated, models of coma density are run. If the data matches predictions, comfort grows. If it defies them, unease deepens. Already, some begin to prepare for longer-term tracking. The visitor's path will carry it outward again, into the depths of the solar system. If we are to learn more, we must follow as long as possible, until it fades into the dark, where only the largest instruments can still hear its faint voice. The chase may last months, even years, depending on how bright it remains. Every additional observation is precious. Each one is another note in the slow song of truth. And beneath all the science, the philosophical current continues. If Atlas is ordinary, it is extraordinary still, for it is a shard of another star's story delivered to us by chance. If Atlas is not ordinary, if it carries strangeness that refuses to bow to natural explanation, then it may be the first open door to something greater than we have ever known. Either way, it forces us to see ourselves in cosmic context, a young species on a small world, straining to understand the footsteps of travelers who may be older, stranger, or simply different. The reappearance after blackout is therefore not just a technical event, it is a symbolic one. It tells us how we handle uncertainty, how we balance patience with imagination, how we resist the lure of easy answers. The visitor has returned. The data is in our hands. The rest is up to us. Will we listen carefully? Will we question ourselves honestly? Will we allow the story to unfold in the rhythm the universe demands, not the rhythm we crave? These are the questions Atlas asks, whether it means to or not. And so part 5 ends with a turning point. The silence is over. The whispers have become numbers again, and the mystery is no longer hidden, but standing once more in the open sky. What those numbers tell us, we will explore next. For the visitor's path is far from finished, and every mile it travels writes another line in a story that is only beginning to reveal itself. The weeks after reappearance are the most delicate, for this is when the visitor reveals whether it will settle into the predictable rhythm of a comet or continue to whisper strangeness into our ears. Day after day, data arrives. Light curves, spectra, position measurements. Each is compared to the predictions written during the blackout. Some align perfectly, others do not. And in those deviations, even when small, lies the heart of mystery. Astronomers chart the path with exquisite care. They trace the orbit across the sky like surveyors marking boundaries on a map. Gravity is exact, and the calculations are unforgiving. If the visitor's course differs even slightly from what gravity alone dictates, the difference must be explained. Outgassing can push, yes, but the push has a signature. It leaves fingerprints in brightness, in asymmetry, in chemistry. If the course change is real, if it is greater than natural sublimation allows, then the ledger tilts once more toward the extraordinary. Chemistry, too, refuses to stay silent. Observatories confirm the ratios again and again. Carbon dioxide still outweighs water, stubborn in its dominance. Nickel's lonely voice continues to echo without iron. Explanations multiply: selective sublimation, surface crusts, radiation history, and some alien nursery. Each explanation is possible, but none is satisfying. The unease grows not because one anomaly exists, but because they cluster together like stars forming a constellation. A flat inclination, a blackout timed at perihelion, a chemistry that leans against expectations. Each could be coincidence. Together, they raise questions harder to dismiss. In conference rooms and email threads, scientists argue. Some urge restraint. They point out the dangers of premature conclusions. They remind colleagues of history's cautionary tales. Others, quieter but persistent, ask what patience means if anomalies are never admitted. They argue that to ignore the strangeness is as unscientific as to inflate it. Between the poles of caution and curiosity, the debate continues, shaping papers, framing presentations, guiding proposals for further study. The visitor has become more than an object. It has become a mirror in which the scientific community sees itself, divided between its instincts to imagine and its duty to doubt. Meanwhile, the public story deepens. News outlets churn headlines, some sober, others sensational. Social media erupts with theories, alien probes, cosmic omens, natural wonders. Amateur astronomers share their images, stacking exposures, plotting light curves of their own. The line between professional and amateur blurs, as it always does in times of cosmic drama. The visitor belongs to everyone who looks up, and that shared ownership fuels both inspiration and confusion. For every careful explanation, there is a louder speculation. For every cautious press release, there are a dozen wild claims. The truth struggles to hold its ground against the tide of imagination. In the quiet of laboratories, another story unfolds. Samples of meteorites are re-examined. Could similar chemistry exist in fragments that have already fallen to Earth? Simulations of planet formation are rerun with new parameters. Could alien nurseries truly produce such compositions? Computers hum late into the night, spinning models of dust, jets, and trajectories. Graduate students, exhausted but exhilarated, chase anomalies across datasets. Professors argue about wording in drafts. Journals prepare for papers that will be cited for decades, whether they prove or disprove. The visitor is shaping careers as much as it shapes debates. There is also talk of missions. Some whisper of sending a probe, though the practicalities are daunting. Launch windows are narrow, distances are vast, speeds are high. But imagination is not limited by engineering. Plans are sketched on whiteboards. What instruments would be needed? What trajectories are possible? Even if no probe is launched, the thought experiment itself has value. It forces us to imagine what we would ask if we could touch the visitor directly. Would we drill into its crust? Would we sample its gases? Would we photograph its surface in search of symmetry or scars? In imagining, we prepare ourselves for futures when such missions may be possible. But for now, we rely on light. Light that has crossed millions of kilometers, bounced off ice and dust, bent through telescopes, split into spectra. Light is our only messenger, and light tells us that the visitor is both familiar and strange, both comet and question. It glows like others have glowed, yet it resists fitting neatly into the categories we prefer. It is both ordinary and extraordinary, depending on which data you choose to emphasize. And so we emphasize all of it, refusing to let any piece go unnoticed. The philosophical weight grows heavier. Each interstellar visitor is not just a rock, It is a story about how we interpret the unknown. If Atlas proves ordinary, it will remind us that nature has more variety than our textbooks admit. If it proves extraordinary, it will remind us that we are not the only storytellers in the cosmos. Either way, it expands the horizon of what we can imagine. And imagination, tempered by discipline, is the true gift of science. To stand at the edge of knowledge and admit both wonder and ignorance, that is the human posture before the stars. Part 6 closes with anticipation thick in the air. The visitor is visible again. The anomalies persist, the debates sharpen, the data multiplies, and the question that hovered during the blackout only grows louder now. What is this object truly? Is it a shard of alien geology, or is it something else? The story is far from over. The visitor continues its path, outward now, carrying with it the weight of every gaze fixed upon it. And as it travels, so too does our imagination, following, questioning, waiting for the next revelation. Outward it goes, retreating from the glare of the sun, yet brighter in the minds of those who chase it. Now begins the long watch, the patient phase, where the visitor drifts farther into the solar system but refuses to fade into irrelevance. Telescopes across the world continue to track its flight, squeezing every photon for meaning. The object, once hidden behind silence, now stretches its enigma across the weeks. Each night's observation, another note in a score we are still learning to read. In these nights, astronomers turn again to light curves. They measure how brightness rises and falls as the object spins. Variations betray shape, elongated, flattened, perhaps tumbling. Their smooth periodicity would suggest a simple rotation, like a stone skipping through the void. A jagged, irregular curve would hint at fragmentation or at complex geometry, unlike anything we have modeled before. Already, whispers circulate that the visitor's pulse is odd, too clean or too irregular, depending on which data set one trusts. The truth is buried in the noise, but speculation thrives in noise, and each team guards its conclusions with both pride and caution. Spectra too keep yielding puzzles. Even as the object cools, carbon dioxide remains strong, refusing to yield dominance to water. Nickel's lonely peaks continue to cut through graphs, iron still absent. Some astronomers grow weary of these anomalies, convinced they must be artifacts of instrumentation. Others grow more convinced with every repetition that the strangeness is real. Each camp builds its case, presenting talks, writing drafts, arguing in the quiet fury of academic discourse. Science is not always calm. It is often conflict, sharpened by evidence. And this visitor has become a battlefield of interpretations. Beyond the debates, there are whispers of patterns. Some suggest that the brightness variations look too precise, as though repeating with mechanical rhythm. Others counter that such rhythms can arise from natural spin, from jets that vent in cycles, from fractured surfaces turning in and out of sunlight. The line between natural and intentional blurs, not because the data demands it, but because the human mind cannot help but explore both. Curiosity is a double-edged instrument. It builds our theories, but it also tempts us into stories the data has not earned. Meanwhile, the public narrative swells. Documentaries begin production. Podcasts record late into the night, discussing what it means to witness another interstellar messenger. Social feeds light up with images from amateurs who chase the visitor with cameras not much larger than dinner plates, yet capable of capturing trails against the stars. They feel part of the story, and in truth, they are. Their data, stacked and shared, fills in gaps professionals cannot cover. Crowdsourced astronomy has become a new force, and the visitor has become a shared quarry for thousands of eyes. This is not new in human history. Comets have always been collective. Ancient peoples watched together, fearing or celebrating the sudden appearance of a bright wanderer in the heavens. They carved them into stone, painted them into chronicles, folded them into myths. Today we carve them into graphs and paint them into journal articles, but the instinct is the same, to make meaning of a traveler from beyond. Atlas has become our myth for this generation, not of doom or empire's fall, but of possibility, of contact, of cosmic context. The language is different, the tools sharper, but the pulse of awe is unchanged. As it drifts outward, the question of origin grows sharper. Models suggest trajectories, tracing paths backward into the galaxy. Which star did it come from? What nursery shaped its chemistry? Could we even know? Interstellar space is vast and cruel to trajectories. Even small perturbations erase footprints. Yet still, astronomers trace lines backward, imagining alien suns, alien disks of dust, alien planets where such an object might have been born. Each guess is another thread connecting our system to the wider galaxy, a reminder that we are part of a community of stars, even if most of that community remains silent. Philosophers and theologians begin to weigh in as well. If the object is natural, it is a symbol of the universe's abundance, of worlds we cannot yet see, but can still touch through messengers like this. If the object is not natural, if it whispers of intent, then it is something else altogether. Evidence that we are not alone. Either interpretation reshapes the way humanity imagines itself. In classrooms, students ask their teachers what it means. In coffee shops, friends argue about aliens. In observatories, scientists sharpen their models. A rock from beyond has become a mirror in which an entire species examines itself. Some speak of fear. If it is artificial, who sent it? And why? To observe, to probe, to ignore us entirely while passing through. The scale of such patience is frightening. Civilizations that measure in millions of years, missions that span generations. To some, this possibility is a comfort. To others, it is a threat. Both responses are human, born of our long history of watching the sky for omens. We have always read ourselves into the stars. Atlas simply continues that tradition, amplified by technology and by a world connected enough to share its awe in real time. But fear is only one side of the coin. Wonder fills the other. To imagine that we might not be alone is not only to fear the unknown, it is also to be lifted by it. It is to believe that the cosmos is not indifferent, that intelligence may bloom more than once, that the long silence may someday break. And even if Atlas proves only to be ice and dust, its strangeness reminds us that the universe is richer than our categories. That too is wonder. That too is worth celebrating. So the long watch continues. Night after night, data arrives, noisy and imperfect, yet slowly clarifying. The visitor drifts outward, but the mystery clings to it like a shadow that will not fade. We do not yet know what it is. We do not yet know what it means. But we know it matters. And in science, that is enough to keep watching, enough to keep asking, enough to keep waiting. Part 7 ends here with the object receding into the depths, but the questions only drawing closer. The silence of conjunction is behind us. The silence of deep space lies ahead. Between the two, humanity huddles around its instruments, listening as hard as it can, hoping to hear what the universe is trying to say. Distance changes everything. The farther the visitor drifts, the fainter it grows, and the more effort it takes to hold on to its whisper. Large telescopes extend their exposures, stacking photons that arrive with the weariness of a long journey. Instruments strain at their limits, squeezing signal from noise. Yet even as the visitor fades, the fascination does not. In some ways it deepens because the farther it goes, the more it feels like we are following a secret as it leaves our world behind. Brightness curves remain the focus. Each observation is compared to the last, searching for consistency or surprise. Sometimes the curve looks smooth, regular, like a spinning shard reflecting sunlight. To other times it flickers oddly, as though something within is shifting, cracking, venting. Debate sharpens. Are we seeing the natural fatigue of a comet or the controlled rhythm of something engineered? No consensus forms. Data is noisy. Interpretations multiply. Science lives in this tension, where every possibility must remain on the table until evidence closes the doors. Chemistry, too, continues its stubbornness. The imbalance persists, carbon dioxide ruling over water, nickel lines repeating without their iron partners. Each new spectrum should have softened the anomaly. Instead, it entrenches it. Papers circulate in draft form, some insisting on exotic natural processes, others daring to hint at non-natural explanations. The cautious majority remain in the middle, urging patience. But the middle is not exciting, and so the world outside the labs grows impatient, hungry for conclusion. That hunger feeds media, feeds speculation, feeds the cultural story that now runs parallel to the scientific one. That cultural story cannot be ignored. The visitor has become more than an astronomical event. It has become a touchstone for conversation about humanity's place in the universe. Documentaries premiere, streaming services rush to dramatize the mystery. Talk shows debate the meaning of interstellar visitors. Even in politics, the object surfaces as metaphor. Some leaders invoking it as symbol of unity, others as symbol of vigilance, a cold rock or a deliberate probe. The visitor has already transformed into something larger, a mirror for our fears and hopes. It matters not only for what it is, but for what we say it is. Meanwhile, the professional work grinds on. Astronomers propose extended observation campaigns, vying for precious telescope time. Each night given to Atlas is a night taken from another project, another galaxy, another star. The competition is fierce, yet the visitor's uniqueness wins it allies. Time is granted, nights are scheduled, and the faint point of light continues to be followed as it flees outward. Scientists know that opportunities like this are rare. Every photon gathered is history in the making, whether the object proves mundane or extraordinary. In laboratories, models expand. Some simulate the possibility of a fractured nucleus, fragments slowly separating, each venting its own gases. Others simulate thin-shelled structures like sails that could account for the peculiar chemistry and light curves. Still others revisit solar system history, asking whether interstellar visitors are truly as rare as we once thought, or whether we have simply lacked the sensitivity to see them until now. The models diverge wildly, but each adds a piece to the puzzle. Science is less about finding answers than it is about narrowing the field of possible questions. The public waits less patiently. Online forums buzz with claims of cover-ups, of secret missions launched to intercept the visitor, of signals buried in the data. Most of it is noise, but beneath the noise lies a genuine yearning. A yearning to be part of the cosmos, to know that we are not alone in the dark. That yearning explains why the visitor captures imaginations so fiercely. It is not just a comet. It is a symbol, a possibility, a vessel into which billions pour their longing. To scientists, this can be frustrating. To philosophers, it is inevitable. Human beings are meaning makers, and meaning clings to mystery like moss to stone. Through all of this, the visitor continues its path. Its orbit carries it outward, but still within reach. Plans form to track it for months, perhaps years, until it grows too faint even for our largest eyes. And as it goes, it writes into our collective memory the lesson that discovery is not a single event, but a process unfolding slowly, unevenly across many hands and minds. The visitor is teaching us patience, even as it tests that patience to the limit. By now, the comparisons are inevitable. To ʻOumuamua, whose silent acceleration remains unresolved. To Borisov, whose ordinariness reassured but also bored. To every comet in human history that arrived with fear or wonder attached. Atlas is its own story, yet also part of this larger lineage of celestial wanderers. And in that lineage it may prove to be a hinge, either closing the door on wild speculation with proof of naturalness, or prying the door open wider with evidence that something more lingers behind the stars. In the classrooms of the future, children will read about this moment. They will not remember the details of spectra or light curves. They will remember that humanity once stood on the edge of declaring itself less alone or more alone than ever before. They will remember how we handled the uncertainty, whether with patience or panic, imagination or discipline. That perhaps will be Atlas's greatest legacy, not what it was, but how we responded to what it might have been. Part 8 ends with the visitor receding, but the questions swelling. We see less of it each night, but we think more about it with every passing day. Its light fades, but its meaning grows brighter, and as it drifts into the outer dark, we cannot help but wonder what revelations may still lie ahead, hidden in the faint whispers we continue to collect, photon by photon, as long as our instruments can endure. The visitor grows fainter, yet paradoxically the debate around it grows louder. Night by night the data dwindles, but its echoes ripple wider across human culture. Each photon caught by a telescope becomes more precious, each line of spectrum more scrutinized. Scientists know they are running out of time. The object is slipping away not only physically into the depths of the solar system, but also into the realm of memory, where stories outweigh measurements. What remains to be gathered now must last decades, perhaps centuries, as humanity continues to wrestle with the meaning of what passed through its skies. In observatories, teams adjust their strategies. Exposure times stretch longer. Instruments that were once confident now strain at the edge of capability. Detections are confirmed, then reconfirmed, as faint signals flirt with the border of noise. No one wants to be the one who mistakes a cosmic ray or a sensor glitch for truth. Yet even in the difficulty, there is exhilaration. The chase is nearing its end, and the end of a chase sharpens the senses. Every data point feels final, a closing line in a story written in starlight. The chemistry, though fading, continues to surprise. Even as activity wanes, the same peculiar imbalance holds. Carbon dioxide whispering louder than water, nickel standing solitary without iron. Explanations remain unsatisfying. If the visitor were truly ordinary, its chemistry should have shifted by now. Instead, it resists like a melody repeating its refrain long after the song should have changed key. This persistence fuels speculation. Some argue that the anomalies are signals of an alien geology, the fingerprint of a nursery star unlike our own. Others dare to suggest engineering. Most cling to patience, unwilling to leap, yet beneath the restraint the questions grow heavier. The longer the imbalance persists, the harder it is to dismiss. Orbit measurements tighten too. The object has reappeared precisely where predicted. Almost, but not entirely. Small deviations accumulate, Not enough to break physics, but enough to unsettle the more cautious minds. Natural forces can explain them, but only with difficulty. Outgassing could do it, but the pattern is awkward. Radiation pressure could do it, but not quite to this degree. Each explanation bends, strains, creaks under the weight of the data. None collapse, but none stand tall either. The visitor balances on the knife edge between natural and extraordinary, and no one knows which way it will lean. Outside the observatories, the cultural narrative grows unstoppable. Books are announced, films are scripted, interviews proliferate. Some declare the object proof of alien contact. Others insist it is proof of cosmic randomness. Both positions thrive because certainty is more comfortable than ambiguity, and ambiguity is all that science can offer. But beyond the noise, a subtler shift takes place. The visitor changes how people look at the sky. More telescopes are purchased. More amateurs begin observing. More children dream of astronomy, of spaceflight, of questions larger than themselves. This too is the legacy of Atlas, to ignite a hunger for the stars that burns beyond its fading light. Philosophers and theologians continue their debates. Some argue that the object, whatever it is, proves that the universe is richer than our categories. Others argue that its silence proves the opposite, that we remain alone, surrounded by unfeeling stone. Still others insist that the question itself is the answer, that to wonder is to be human, and that the value lies not in certainty, but in the pursuit. The object, silent and unknowing, becomes a vessel for meaning far beyond its physical nature. It does not need to speak to change us. Its very presence has already done so. Meanwhile, the practical work of astronomy continues. Catalogues are updated, papers are published, conferences devote entire sessions to the visitor, arguments spilling late into the night. Some papers will fade into obscurity, others will be cited for decades. All a part of the tapestry, the slow weaving of knowledge from fragments of light. In this way, the visitor becomes immortal. Long after it fades beyond detection, its data will remain, locked into archives, ready for new generations to re-examine with tools not yet invented. The object will vanish, but its echo will never die. The chase itself becomes symbolic. Astronomers speak of it in terms of pursuit, of following a mystery into the dark. They know they cannot catch it, cannot hold it, cannot interrogate it directly. Yet the act of pursuit is meaningful in itself. It teaches humility, patience, persistence. It reminds us that the universe does not bend to our desires. We must bend to it, stretching our instruments, our imaginations, our endurance. The visitor teaches us that discovery is not always about answers. Sometimes it is about learning how to live with questions. As weeks turn to months, the object recedes into the outer solar system. Soon it will pass beyond the reach of all but the largest instruments, and then beyond even them. Its light will fade into the background of stars, indistinguishable from countless other points. Yet by then it will already have carved its place into history. It will not vanish from memory. It will remain as ʻOumuamua remains, as Borisov remains, a touchstone, a reminder, a messenger from the dark. Part 9 closes with that image, the visitor drifting outward, silent, unknowable, yet unforgettable. Its faint glow is weaker each night, but its story burns stronger. It has given us anomalies to argue over, data to puzzle with, metaphors to live by. It has given us a glimpse of a cosmos larger than we can imagine, and a reminder that even fleeting visitors can reshape the way we see ourselves. The chase may be ending, but the meaning is only beginning. The visitor is leaving us, but we will never leave it. By now the visitor is far from the sun, moving outward on a path that will soon carry it beyond the reach of even our greatest telescopes. Its glow diminishes, its voice grows fainter, and each detection feels like the last faint word of a fading conversation. Astronomers know this stage well. It is the twilight of an object's passage, the moment when it begins to merge back into the sea of stars, indistinguishable from the countless lights scattered across the night. Yet even in this twilight, there is work to be done, for the final notes of a song often hold the key to its meaning. Observations stretch longer, exposures push to extremes. Instruments hum deep into the night, their sensors cooled to silence, their operators patient against fatigue. Each photon collected at this distance carries enormous weight, for there will not be many more. These photons may one day be re-examined by tools not yet built, reinterpreted by theories not yet written, and so the work continues, even when it feels like futility, because science is built not on certainty but on accumulation. Every scrap of data is a brick in a wall that future generations will climb. The anomalies persist, though faintly. Carbon dioxide remains curiously strong compared to water, as though the object's essence refuses to soften even as its activity wanes. Nickel's lonely lines whisper faintly in the spectra, still unaccompanied by iron. To many, these anomalies are now old companions, familiar yet unsolved. Some have grown weary of them, ready to set them aside as quirks of measurement or accidents of geology. Others cling to them, insisting they are clues to something larger, something that will only be understood years from now. Science thrives on this tension, between those eager to move on and those unwilling to let go. The orbit, too, remains a quiet battleground. Precise measurements show that the visitor's path is close to what gravity predicts, but not quite. The deviations are small, almost trivial, but real enough to matter. Natural forces can explain them barely. Outgassing, radiation pressure, fragmentation, all can be stretched to cover the data. But the stretching shows. It feels less like explanation and more like excuse. Some scientists argue that this is acceptable, that nature is messy and models are imperfect. Others argue that such excuses are dangerous, that anomalies should not be dismissed so easily. The debate will outlast the object itself. Culturally, the visitor is already immortal. It has become a metaphor in books, a theme in films, a question in classrooms. Children draw it in crayon, teachers explain it on chalkboards, journalists invoke it as symbol of the unknown. Whether comet or craft, probe or shard, it has taken root in imagination. And imagination, once seeded, never dies. The object may leave the sky, but it will remain in minds and stories, its journey retold in countless ways. This too is a kind of survival, one the object never intended, but one it has nonetheless achieved. The professional community prepares for the end of direct observation. Proposals for future missions are drafted, even if they will never fly. Instruments are recalibrated for other targets, other questions. Papers are finalized, conferences planned. A sense of closure settles in, though never complete. Science does not end with neat conclusions. It ends with transitions, with questions handed from one generation to the next. Atlas will pass out of view, but its data will remain, archived and waiting, a riddle preserved for those who come after us. There is sadness in this, but also beauty. Not every story is meant to end with revelation. Some end with uncertainty, with mysteries unsolved. Yet those mysteries are not failures, they are invitations. Invitations to imagine more, to build better instruments, to ask deeper questions. The visitor, by refusing to fit neatly into our categories, has reminded us that the universe is still capable of surprising us. That alone is worth the effort, the sleepless nights, the long exposures. Mystery is not an obstacle to science, it is its fuel. Philosophically, the object has left us with a mirror. We see ourselves in how we interpret it. Those who long for contact see signs of intent. Those who fear the unknown see omens. Those who demand patience see anomalies as puzzles to be solved in time. Each stance reveals more about humanity than about the object itself. That is the final gift of Atlas, to hold up a mirror to our species, to show us the range of our imagination and the depth of our uncertainty. The object does not speak, yet it has told us more about ourselves than many things closer to home. As it slips farther into the dark, it joins a silent fraternity, ʻOumuamua, Borisov, and the countless others we have not yet seen, will never see or saw without knowing. Interstellar visitors are rare, but they are not unique. More will come. Some may be ordinary, others strange. One may one day arrive close enough to touch, to sample, to answer the questions this one leaves behind. The universe is patient. It will send again. Until then, we wait. Part 10 closes with the visitor's light dimming, its presence fading from our skies but not from our minds. We have followed it through silence, through anomaly, through speculation, and now into obscurity. Its story is unfinished, but perhaps that is the point. Not all tales resolve neatly. Some remain open, their final meaning left for future generations to discover. The visitor has left us not with answers, but with questions. And questions, after all, are the most valuable gift the cosmos can give. The night skies have grown quieter. The visitor, once a bright subject of frantic observation, now lingers at the edge of invisibility. Only the largest telescopes can still track its faint signal, and even then only through exposures stretched to exhausting lengths. What once required minutes of patience now demands hours, sometimes entire nights, to pull a whisper from the darkness. Yet still the pursuit continues, because endings in science are never sudden. They are gradual fade-outs, the way twilight becomes night. Each detection feels like a farewell. Astronomers speak of the object with a kind of affection, as though it were a guest who stayed too briefly but left a lasting impression. They review their notes, their spectra, their light curves, and feel a pang of loss knowing the flow of data is slowing to a trickle. Already, proposals for extended observations are being denied, not because the visitor has lost significance, but because telescope time is finite and must be shared with new mysteries, new targets. Even in wonder, practicality presses in. The cosmos is too vast to linger forever on a single messenger, and yet the data already gathered still has power. Teams across the globe begin their final analyses, combing through every photon, searching for patterns missed in the rush of observation. Long nights of frantic measurement now yield to long months of careful study. Students write dissertations on the chemistry of the coma, on the peculiar brightness curves, on the small orbital deviations that remain stubborn in the datasets. Professors debate word choices in drafts, conscious that the framing of these anomalies will influence how future generations remember this moment. To call something unusual is different from calling it unexplained. To call it unlikely is different from impossible. Language is as much a tool as a telescope, and it shapes how knowledge survives. Culturally, the visitor has already transcended the reach of science. In novels, it becomes a vessel sent across the stars. In films, it is a silent probe watching us. In poetry, it is a metaphor for fleeting love, for exile, for messages that cannot be read. In classrooms, it is a spark for imagination, a story teachers use to remind students that the universe is alive with possibilities. Few astronomical events in history have so quickly escaped the boundaries of science to become part of myth. Halley's Comet once filled that role, feared and celebrated in equal measure. Now Atlas has taken its place as the comet of our own age. not feared but wondered at, debated, interpreted. Meanwhile, scientists continue to grapple with its peculiarities. The dominance of carbon dioxide over water refuses to fade, even as activity dwindles. Nickel's lonely peaks remain in the spectra, their absence of iron harder to explain with each passing day. Small deviations in the orbit continue to tease, never large enough to declare unnatural, never small enough to fully dismiss. The anomalies hover like riddles half solved, taunting both optimists and skeptics alike. Each camp finds in them what they want to see. For some, proof of the strangeness of nature. For others, hints of something engineered. The visitor holds the mirror steady, and humanity peers into its own divided reflection. The tension between patience and imagination becomes sharper as the visitor fades. Patience insists that anomalies often resolve with time, that mysteries shrink as more data arrives, that nature rarely needs help to surprise us. Imagination insists that some anomalies persist because they are truly new, because they are clues to realities we have not yet dared to accept. Both instincts are human, both are necessary. Without patience, science would leap into fantasies. Without imagination, science would never leap at all. The visitor forces us to balance these instincts, walking the tightrope between skepticism and wonder. In the broader world, governments take notice. Reports circulate about the need to monitor interstellar visitors more closely. Funding agencies discuss expanding survey programs, investing in faster, wider telescopes to catch future messengers earlier. Missions are proposed, small probes, rapid interceptors, that could one day chase such objects, sample them directly, answer questions left open by Atlas. Most of these proposals will not survive the gauntlet of budgets and politics, but the ideas themselves matter. They plant seeds in the minds of engineers, seeds that may sprout decades later when technology and opportunity align. For now, we have only memory and light. The visitor recedes, leaving behind its peculiar fingerprint. Chemistry that defies easy explanation, an orbit that unsettles, a cultural wave of wonder that refuses to ebb. Its legacy is already secure. It has joined the pantheon of interstellar enigmas, alongside ʻOumuamua and Borisov, as one of the rare few that passed through our neighborhood and forced us to look deeper. Each visitor widens our sense of the galaxy, reminding us that we are not isolated, but part of a larger flow of matter, ideas, and perhaps even intelligence. The fading brings with it a melancholy beauty. To follow something into the dark, knowing you cannot keep it forever, is an act of devotion. Astronomers know this feeling well. They dedicate years to comets that disintegrate, to stars that explode, to galaxies that drift out of view. Atlas is another chapter in that long tradition of loving what cannot be held. It is an act of faith in the value of knowledge itself, even when knowledge refuses to resolve neatly into answers. Part 11 closes with the image of the visitor as a dwindling ember, a point of light almost swallowed by the night. We lean forward, straining to catch its last whispers, even as we know they will soon fade into silence. Yet the silence will not be empty. It will be filled with what the visitor left behind: questions, debates, inspiration, awe. In that sense, the object does not leave us at all. It stays not in the sky, but in the human imagination, where it may burn brighter than ever. Darkness deepens. The visitor is now a faint ember against the canvas of space, tracked only by the most powerful instruments and the most determined observers. Its passage through our skies is nearly over, though the questions it raised linger with a persistence brighter than its fading light. Where once there was a flurry of nightly data, now there are long gaps, nights of failure where even hours of exposure yield nothing but noise. Yet still, teams return to their consoles, unwilling to let the visitor go without wringing every last whisper of truth from its trajectory. There is a kind of reverence in these final observations. Astronomers know they are witnessing an ending, one that will not repeat in their lifetimes. Interstellar objects do not visit on human schedules. They arrive without warning and depart without apology. To follow one into obscurity is to acknowledge the smallness of our control, to accept that discovery is not mastery. It is pursuit, sometimes fruitless, always humbling. And so, as the visitor slips away, the act of watching becomes a ritual of respect, a farewell to a guest who has unsettled our imaginations in ways we are only beginning to grasp. The debates, however, do not fade with the light. They intensify. With fresh data scarce, scientists turn to the archives, analyzing every photon collected over the past months. Teams publish papers with conflicting interpretations, some insisting that the anomalies can be reconciled with natural processes, others arguing that they remain stubbornly unresolved. Conferences become battlegrounds of perspective. One camp presents models of exotic ice compositions, crusts that vent unevenly, radiation histories that could explain the chemistry. Another points out the persistent absence of iron, the troubling regularities in light curves, the orbital deviations that strain natural explanations. Between them stretches the gulf of uncertainty, bridged only by the recognition that both patience and imagination must be allowed their place. Culturally, the visitor has already transcended data. Its story has entered the bloodstream of art and narrative. Musicians write songs inspired by its journey. Writers use it as metaphor for fleeting encounters, for the mysteries that pass through our lives without explanation. Filmmakers imagine scenarios where such an object is not silent, but speaks, carrying messages from distant civilizations. In this way, the object becomes immortal, not in the sky, but in the stories we tell. Few astronomical events leave such a mark. The visitor has joined the ranks of those rare phenomena, comets, eclipses, supernovae, that transform into cultural milestones. The public fascination does not wane. Even as the object grows invisible, forums buzz with speculation. Some argue that the truth is being hidden, that data is suppressed, that signals have been found but not revealed. Others insist the opposite, that the visitor was always ordinary, overhyped by a world desperate for wonder. Between these poles lies the real story, that ambiguity is uncomfortable and humans crave closure. The visitor denies us closure, and so we invent our own. This too is part of its legacy. It has shown us how deeply we yearn for certainty and how poorly we tolerate the absence of it. In research institutions, proposals for the future gather momentum. New survey telescopes are planned, designed to sweep wider areas of sky with greater sensitivity. Missions are discussed, rapid response probes that could be launched to intercept the next interstellar visitor, capable of sampling it directly before it vanishes into the dark. These proposals may take decades to realize, but they represent a shift in perspective. Where once we thought of interstellar objects as curiosities, now we think of them as opportunities, rare, fleeting, but precious. Atlas has taught us that we must be ready, that preparation is as important as patience. The object itself remains silent. It offers no final revelation, no sudden signal, no dramatic transformation. Instead, it leaves us with the same quiet strangeness it carried from the start. Chemistry that resists full explanation, an orbit that hints at hidden pushes, a glow that seemed at times too ordered, at times too unruly. It leaves us, in other words, with mystery, and mystery is not disappointment. Mystery is the heartbeat of discovery. Without it, science would stagnate. With it, science grows, stretches, dares to imagine more. Philosophically, the visitor underscores a truth we often forget, that the universe is not obliged to be clear. It is not a puzzle designed for our satisfaction. It is a vast and indifferent expanse in which meaning is something we create, not something we are handed. The visitor did not come to teach us. It simply passed by, carrying with it the signatures of another place, another story. Yet by witnessing it, by grappling with its anomalies, we have taught ourselves something about our own hunger to know, our own limits, our own resilience in the face of silence. There is melancholy in letting go. Astronomers speak of the final detections with a kind of mourning. They know they will never see this object again. They know it will travel for millions of years, unseen, untouched, a silent wanderer in the galactic sea. Yet there is also pride, for in the brief window it gave us, we learned more than we could have imagined. We expanded our understanding of interstellar objects, sharpened our instruments, deepened our cultural imagination. The visitor gave us questions, and questions are a gift that outlast answers. Part 12 closes with that recognition. The object is gone, nearly invisible now, but the wake it leaves is vast. In science, in culture, in philosophy, it has changed us. It has reminded us that discovery is fleeting, that truth is slippery, that meaning is something we must build together. It has shown us the beauty of not knowing, the dignity of patience, the thrill of imagination. And though it has slipped beyond our reach, it will remain with us always, not in the sky but in the stories we tell, the questions we ask, and the stars we continue to watch. The visitor is nearly gone now, its light reduced to a ghostly shimmer detectable only by the most persistent observers. Each new attempt to capture it feels more like an act of faith than an act of measurement. Hours of exposure yield the faintest of trails, so dim it can vanish in background noise if calibration slips even slightly. Yet astronomers continue, not because they expect surprises, but because they know these last photons are part of history. To let them slip away uncollected would feel like neglecting a sacred duty. And so, even in obscurity, the pursuit endures. The object's fading presence has shifted the conversation from what it is to what it means. The questions raised months ago remain unresolved, hanging in the air like constellations drawn but unfinished. Why did carbon dioxide dominate so strongly over water? Why did nickel sing without iron? Why did its orbit lean so unnaturally flat compared to the other wanderers we know? Each anomaly remains unsolved, and the lack of resolution forces us to consider that some mysteries will not be solved in real time. They will be puzzles handed to future generations, awaiting new tools and new perspectives. Science is not always about answers now. Sometimes it is about planting questions that bloom later. The cultural impact has settled into permanence. The visitor has passed from news cycle to narrative, from breaking story to enduring myth. Writers compare it to ʻOumuamua, noting the strange symmetry of two enigmas arriving in such close succession after millennia of silence. Artists paint it as a lonely shard of another sun, drifting with secrets it cannot reveal. Filmmakers build entire stories around what it might have been, weaving human fears and hopes into its silence. Children who will never see it in the sky grow up hearing about it, learning that the universe sometimes drops questions into our laps without answers. That too is a form of education, teaching not facts but humility. In the halls of science, the visitor remains a point of contention. Some declare that the anomalies are artifacts, destined to fade with better data. Others argue they are genuine, stubborn fingerprints of an interstellar geology or technology. The truth may take decades to emerge, if it ever does, but the debates themselves shape the field, sharpening arguments, inspiring new instruments, drawing more minds into the search. Controversy, while frustrating, is also fuel. It forces us to push deeper, to refine methods, to clarify language. Atlas, even as it leaves, continues to shape the way science is done. Governments and institutions are already reacting to its legacy. Budgets shift, proposals multiply. The notion of a rapid response mission moves from science fiction to tentative feasibility studies. Could we one day build spacecraft that wait, fueled and ready to launch at short notice when the next interstellar visitor is spotted? Could we intercept it, sample it, answer questions directly rather than through faint photons? The visitor has made these questions urgent. Even if no probe is built, the very act of asking moves humanity closer to readiness. The next messenger may not pass unexamined. Philosophically, the object forces us to reconsider our relationship with uncertainty. We crave closure, yet closure is often a luxury the universe does not grant. To live with Atlas is to live with ambiguity, to hold both natural and extraordinary explanations in tension without surrendering to either. This is difficult for the human mind, which prefers stories with endings. But perhaps this difficulty is the lesson. The cosmos does not exist to comfort us. It exists to challenge us, to stretch our imagination and discipline until both ache. The visitor's refusal to resolve is not a failure. It is a gift, a reminder that the universe remains larger than our comprehension. And still, even in its fading, wonder persists. Amateurs with modest telescopes continue to try, knowing their chances are slim, but also knowing that to try is itself an act of belonging. They stack images, chase noise, compare notes, and find meaning not only in the data, but in the act of searching. The visitor unites them with professionals across continents, across languages, across generations. For a brief time, humanity pointed in the same direction, toward the same enigma. That unity is rare, that unity is precious. As the object drifts farther into the galactic sea, it joins a lineage. It becomes part of the story of humanity's encounters with the interstellar. ʻOumuamua, Borisov, Atlas, each a chapter in a book still being written. Future chapters will follow. Some will be brighter, some dimmer, some stranger. Perhaps one day a visitor will come close enough, linger long enough, or carry signals clear enough to settle the debates once and for all. Until then, we live in the age of hints, of maybes, of questions larger than ourselves. Part 13 closes with the image of the visitor, as it now truly is, a fading ember, carried outward by forces older than Earth itself, vanishing into darkness, yet burning brightly in memory. We no longer see it with clarity, but we feel its presence in the way it reshaped our curiosity, in the way it sharpened our hunger for discovery. The sky is quieter without it, but our imagination is louder, and perhaps that is the true measure of its legacy, that it leaves us asking more than it answered, restless beneath the stars, waiting for the next whisper from the dark. The visitor has slipped almost entirely beyond our reach. Only the most determined astronomers, armed with the largest mirrors and the longest exposures, can still coax a trace of its light from the black. To most eyes, it is already gone, another star lost among billions. Yet its absence feels heavier than its presence ever did, because absence has a way of magnifying mystery. The story of Atlas is no longer about what we see, but about what we remember, and what we choose to believe about what we saw. In the scientific community, the process of distillation begins. Conferences are held where the data is presented in its final, most polished form. Spectra are compared side by side, light curves analyzed until their irregularities are charted with precision. The anomalies remain: the stubborn dominance of carbon dioxide, the haunting absence of iron, the faint deviations in orbit that resist easy classification. Some argue that these are the inevitable quirks of a fragment from a star system unlike our own. Others argue that the persistence of strangeness suggests intent, or at least a kind of complexity we have yet to comprehend. No consensus emerges. Perhaps none ever will. But the lack of consensus does not mean failure. It means the universe has spoken in riddles, and we have not yet learned the language. Outside the observatories, the cultural impact deepens. The visitor becomes a parable in countless retellings. For some, it is the reminder that humanity is small, perched on a fragile world in a galaxy filled with mysteries. For others, it is proof that we are part of something larger, that we are not alone, even if the company is silent. Artists sculpt it, writers fictionalize it, musicians compose around it. In each creation, the visitor becomes something different, transformed by imagination. What science could not define, culture embraces. The rock, the ice, the possible probe, it becomes whatever each of us most needs it to be. Governments and agencies take lessons of their own. The limitations of our instruments, the slowness of our response, the frustration of watching a mystery slip away. All these spur investment in the future. Larger surveys are funded, new detection systems planned, ideas for intercept missions debated. Perhaps it will be decades before the next interstellar object appears, or perhaps only years. When it comes, humanity intends to be better prepared. Atlas has been a teacher in absence, showing us where we are strong and where we are weak. We will be ready, or at least readier, when the next messenger arrives. For philosophers, the meaning of Atlas stretches beyond data. It forces us to ask whether we are truly comfortable with not knowing. Can we accept that some mysteries will not be solved in our lifetimes? Can we embrace ambiguity as a form of truth rather than a failure? The visitor teaches us humility in the face of the infinite. It reminds us that our species, for all its technology, is still at the beginning of its journey, still a child in a universe older than memory. To see Atlas is to feel both small and vast at once, small in our ignorance, vast in our capacity to imagine. And perhaps imagination is the greatest legacy of all. The visitor has sparked new dreams, new stories, new ambitions. It has shown us that even in a world saturated with data and explanation, wonder can still arrive unannounced, shattering the routine. It has shown us that the cosmos is not done surprising us, and in that surprise lies the promise of discovery yet to come. Now the object is gone, truly gone, beyond our reach. But its trail lingers, not in the sky, but in us. In the questions we continue to ask, in the children who look up with renewed curiosity, in the scientists who sharpen their instruments with greater urgency, in the poets who write of silence and light. The visitor is no longer visible, but it is not gone. It has been absorbed into the human story, where it will remain as long as we tell stories under the stars. Part 14 closes the journey. The visitor came from beyond, crossed our skies, unsettled our certainty, and returned to the dark. It left us with mysteries unsolved and imaginations ignited. It reminded us that to live as humans is to live in pursuit of the unknown, to balance patience with wonder, to listen even when the cosmos whispers. Atlas may never reveal its full truth, but in not revealing, it has given us something greater. The hunger to keep searching, to keep asking, to keep waiting for the next whisper from the void. The visitor has vanished into the dark, invisible even to our most powerful instruments. It is gone from our skies, but not from our minds. What remains now is the echo, the legacy of a brief encounter with something that came from beyond. In the vast history of the universe, its passage was insignificant, a fragment of matter gliding past a small world, unnoticed by most. Yet for us, for a species just learning to listen, it was monumental. For a fleeting span of months, we shared our attention, our wonder, our arguments, our imagination, all focused on a solitary traveler that may never return. The finality of its disappearance brings with it a paradox. In one sense, we know more than ever. We have its spectra, its light curves, its orbital maps. We have papers, models, simulations, arguments. A body of knowledge has been built, and it will endure. But in another sense, we are left with less than we hoped. The anomalies persist unresolved, the chemistry unexplained, the orbit unsettling. The visitor left us with questions rather than answers. And perhaps that is the true lesson, that the universe is not obliged to satisfy our curiosity on our schedule. It gives us glimpses, hints, challenges. The rest is left to us. In the absence of new data, the story of Atlas transforms into memory and meaning. For scientists, it is a case study in how to balance skepticism with imagination, caution with curiosity. For culture, it is a story of encounter, an encounter with the unknown that could not be defined but could not be ignored. For children growing up beneath these skies, it is a spark, proof that the universe still holds secrets, proof that discovery is not confined to textbooks, but continues to unfold in real time above their heads. For all of us, it is a reminder that wonder is not a relic of the past. It is alive as the stars themselves. The legacy also lies in preparation. Because of Atlas, humanity will look harder, sooner, faster. Surveys will scan wider. Missions will be designed with more urgency. Perhaps the next visitor will not slip away untouched. Perhaps we will intercept it, sample it, photograph it up close. Perhaps we will answer the questions that Atlas only deepened. Its departure is not an ending, but a beginning, a catalyst for future encounters. In leaving us unsatisfied, it has guaranteed that we will be ready to try again. Philosophically, the visitor compels us to accept that meaning is not only in answers, but in questions. To watch something pass through our world, stirring imagination but refusing explanation, is to feel both our fragility and our resilience. Fragility, because we are reminded of how much we do not know, how much we cannot control. Resilience, because we continue to ask anyway, to build instruments, to write stories, to dream of futures where we might know more. The visitor is gone, but it has left us stronger, hungrier, more united in our pursuit of the unknown. Even now, long after its light has faded from our skies, the visitor continues to shape us. In labs, scientists pore over the data. In classrooms, teachers use it as example. In stories, artists weave it into myth. And in the quiet moments when people look up at the night sky, they remember that once a stranger passed among the stars and gave us the gift of mystery. It reminded us that the cosmos is alive with questions, and that to be human is to chase them. So the story ends as it began, in silence. But it is a different silence now. Not the silence of ignorance, but the silence of reflection. Not the silence of blindness, but the silence of memory. The visitor has left us, but it has left behind a trail not of dust, but of wonder. And wonder, once sparked, does not fade. It grows, it waits, it calls us forward. One day another visitor will come. Perhaps soon, perhaps centuries from now. When it does, we will remember Atlas. We will remember how we strained to listen, how we argued, how we dreamed, and we will be ready to welcome the next messenger with sharper tools, broader minds, and deeper patience. Until then, we live in the wake of a question larger than ourselves, a question carried on the path of a stranger from beyond. The story of Atlas does not end with its disappearance. It ends with us, still here, still watching, still waiting, beneath the endless sky.